Good evening and welcome to the 2026 Ensign Lecture. The Loring Sabin Ensign Lectureship in Contemporary Interpretation of Religious Issues was founded in 1994 by a church who wanted to honor their senior pastor for 25 years of service. I think it's the only endowed lectureship we have like this. But what a powerful way to honor a distinguished pastor. This is the Southport Congregational Church here in Connecticut. The roster of speakers who've delivered this lecture is quite impressive. They include people like Jean Elstein, Margaret Farley, who is on our faculty, Avery Cardinal Dulles, Mark Jordan, Ibu Patel, Tanya Lerman, and I could go on. But we're fortunate to have another illustrious speaker tonight and to introduce him and a special guest who's going to make an appearance with our speaker tonight. I'm going to invite Professor Braxton Shelley to come forward.
It is my proud honor to introduce Yale Divinity School's 2025 Ensign Lecturer, Reverend Lennox Yearwood. One of the most important prophetic voices of our time, one who with voice, heart, mind, and body calls collective attention and collective action to dangers that exist on global and atmospheric scales. Reverend Yearwood was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, grew up in Washington, D.C., graduating from the University of the District of Columbia, and the Howard University School of Divinity. An Air Force veteran, Reverend Yearwood is the president and CEO of Hip Hop Caucus, a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization celebrating some 20 years of advancing civil and human rights through hip hop culture. Senior advisor for Bloomberg Philanthropies, Reverend Yearwood is one of today's most innovative advocates for racial and climate justice. He was one of 50 changemakers selected for Forbes' inaugural Sustainability Leaders list in 2024. He's been recognized as White House Champion of Change for Climate Leadership and has been called a new green hero by Rolling Stone magazine. As I thought about Reverend Yearwood's work over the past weekend, I was reminded of another climate prophet, Elijah the Tishbite, who foretold the ecological consequences of a king's evil actions long before anyone ever conceived of notions like the Anthropocene. In our time and in this climate, we need such courage and creativity. So I'm excited to hear Reverend Yearwood speak today about breaking the chains of environmental sin. But before Reverend Yearwood's lecture, a climate champion, Grammy-nominated singer, art actress, and artivist will come to bless us by singing her new song. This will be Antonique Smith, and the song we will hear is A Love Song to Earth. Let's give them both a hand as they come in that order.
Thank you for that very sweet introduction. And y'all are in for a treat. My amazing brother and co-founder of Climate Revival is coming up next. And so Climate Revival is our organization. I'm CEO and co-founder, and we are mobilizing people of faith and people of color to fight against climate change and fight for environmental justice. I don't know if you guys know that there's a place called Cancer Alley in Louisiana where there's a 95% cancer rate in human beings. It's unbelievable that it's allowed to happen in this country, that it's even legal for human beings to be living like that and dying like that, honestly. And then it's cancer clusters everywhere. I'm from New Jersey, and that kind of is what inspired me to join the movement about 11 years ago, is when I found out that the power plants that are very close to my home in New Jersey is what was causing cancer and asthma in my area. And you know, honestly, I think the deficit in the world is love. Jesus said the two greatest commandments is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And if we were doing that second one, I think the whole world will be different. I've just been named 2025 Ambassador for Earth Day. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And it's a day of action. So that's what Earth Day is going to be this year, a day of action. And it's going to be a lot of actions all over the world. And I think, though, the biggest action that we need is love. Galatians 5:14 says, the whole law, all of the law, there's a lot of laws, y'all know how the Old Testament is, can be summed up in one command. Love thy neighbor as thyself. That's how important it is. If there was more love, we wouldn't be in a climate crisis. If there was more love, then places like Cancer Alley and cancer clusters around this country wouldn't exist. If there was more love, profits wouldn't be more important than people. So I also consider myself an ambassador for love. And the song that I'm going to sing is called Love Song to the Earth. The earth is beautiful. We are actually a part of it. We come from God made us from the dirt. We have to keep each other safe. We have to keep it safe. This is Love Song to the Earth. This is an open letter from you and me together. Tomorrow's in our hands now. Find the words that matter and say them out loud. Make it better somehow. Looking down from up on the moon, it's a tiny blue marble. Who'd have known the ground we stand on could be so fragile? This is a love song to the earth. You're no ordinary world, a diamond in the universe. Heaven's poetry to us. Keep it safe, keep it safe, keep it safe, 'cause it's our own. It's not about possessions, money or religion, how many years we might live, when the only real question that matters is still a matter of perspective. Ooh, looking down from up on the moon, you're a tiny blue marble. Who'd have known the ground we stand on could be so fragile? This is a love song to the earth. You're no ordinary world, a diamond in the universe. Heaven's poetry to us. Keep it safe, keep it safe, keep it safe, 'cause it's our world, it's our world, it's our world, it's our world, it's our world. 'Cause it's our world, it's our world, it's our world, it's our world. This is a love song to the earth. You're no ordinary world. Diamond in the universe, heaven's poetry to us. Keep it safe, keep it safe, keep it safe, 'cause it's our world, it's our world, it's our world. It's our world. It's our world. Thank you so much. Love y'all. Now the amazing, incomparable Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr.
Give it up one more time for the ambassador. I told her, Antonique Smith, that's going to be her, well, I'm going to say her name from now on, Dean, is the ambassador. It's already an A, is Antonique, so the Ambassador Smith, as she leads us in this important Earth Day. Let me say thank you. I am very honored to be here at this critical time, here at the Yale Divinity School. Some of my best and most heart-wrenching days were in a divinity school. So for the students who are here, I can imagine what you're going through. For the faculty who was here, I can imagine what you're going through as well. I was blessed to go to Howard University School of Divinity. For some reason, I was considered really good in the ancient languages. I was very fortunate to be the only TA, whoever was someone who was a TA for both New Testament and Old Testament, which is not an easy task. I was both a TA for the amazing Kane Hope Felder, and then was also a TA for Dr. Jean Rice, and later on for Dr. Alice Bellis. So if you know anything about the scholar aptitude of those individuals, particularly, you probably have heard anything from Dr. Kane Hope Felder or Dr. Jean Rice, you will know I was a glutton for punishment, Dean, in divinity school, for sure. It was a time as well when, honestly, I will tell you, I made a decision that was one in which I was going through a spiritual crisis. It was a time when I decided that I didn't want to be a part of a church that was more concerned about the money than they were about the people. And so at that point in time, that's actually the reason why I thrust myself into languages and was on my way to getting my PhD, to be here or wherever, to be teaching in some classroom. Actually, after now being an activist, that doesn't seem like such a bad thing when you've now been arrested and thrown in the back of paddy wagons. I kind of think back, I should have took that route to hang out in one of those offices and just been there. I'm not sure if I took the right route, Dean, but here we are. But it was an honor to go through that process. It's an honor to be here. I come to you as someone who really thought about this conversation extensively. More so because of the moment that we're in. We are in the midst of a climate crisis. And we are challenged in our faith in this moment because of all that is happening. We are forced to hope for something invisible. We are looking to our words of wisdom, the tales of those who have gone on before, either those from the Hebrew or the New or the Quran or whatever text there may be. We are looking for something to help us through this time. This is a time when we are dealing with not only equality, we are dealing with the idea of existence. Let me shape, before I get into the chains of the sins of the environment, or the environmental sins that we need to break. Let me just first paint the picture, if you may not know. Last year was the hottest year we've ever had. And then this month was the last month, second month of the year, which we haven't yet calculated, which will probably be the hottest month ever, which followed the hottest month ever in January. Last year, we were in a situation dealing with this climate crisis in which Phoenix, Arizona saw over 130 days of more than 100-degree weather. It got so bad in Phoenix that at some points it was 135 to 140 degrees. That would be bad enough. But when people were going out to check on the homeless community, they found them literally stuck to the sidewalk. We had droughts and wildfires. We had a multitude of hurricanes. We had hurricanes back to back. And we've had situations where it has this decimated and devastated our communities. I am from, originally, the great state of Louisiana. And being from Louisiana, in that aspect, this year marks not only the 20-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which impacted me personally, it is also the 15-year anniversary of the BP oil spill. And so we are in a climate crisis. And so my lecture, my conversation today, is one in which I wanted to go through, and I will go through, kind of how we got here, the history of the environmental concern, what I would call the sins of the environmental process, how we got here, why we got here, and what needs to be done. But I can't leap into that part of the conversation without first just stating that it's hard to explain the lifeboat or the life vest on a boat when the sink is actually sinking. They don't tell you about how to put on your mask in the airplane, or they don't tell you how to put on your vest or your seat belts when the plane is going down for a possible crash. They tell you that when you're safely on the runway and you're comfortable in that process, because that is to prepare you that when the situation is happening, you are prepared for the moment that you're in. So this lecture is hard because I now need to talk about the environmental concerns, how we as humans survive this moment while we are literally burning all around us. Literally in North Carolina, in South Carolina, in Myrtle Beach, it is on fire as I'm talking. The office of the Hip Hop Caucus, which is based in Los Angeles and on the East Coast, literally is in a community that was burned to the ground just a few months ago. There are children in India that it got so hot in that community. 3- and 4-year-old children drowned themselves trying to escape the heat. And so in this process, I now need to give this lecture to talk about how in the world do we get here, especially since other human species do not want to do what they need to do to fix the climate crisis. And then on top of that, how does faith play in this moment at this time? Not in some far off time, not in the 60s, not in the 50s, but how does faith play? How do we answer faith when one side, who should understand the morality about fighting for humans, is literally saying that this climate crisis is a hoax? On the other hand, when we have our brothers and sisters who are going to Mecca because of the heat are dying in the thousands. How do you explain the safety measure that you need to take when the plane or the boat is going down? I just wanted to give you that as the backdrop for my conversation. I want to start off, though, by also going into the land and the place that I am, and why this is such an important lecture from a historical aspect. For me, and as a young person, I will never forget seeing the film The Amistad. And seeing The Amistad, I was in this position where I saw the role of those folks who were going through their court case. They were, in essence, property, the boat was en route to Cuba. They overtook that process. That process boat ended up in Long Island, and they ended up here in New Haven. There are streets that are called the Amistad. There are a lot of things to talk about that. What's important about that conversation is that the thing with the Amistad that's so important for this conversation is that while they were fighting to be considered human and to be free, we are fighting for the same thing now as well. So keep that, and let me go through these chains of the environmental process. So first, let me just clarify something. Antonique Smith mentioned that she is the ambassador for Earth Day. And this is the 55th anniversary of not only Earth Day, but also of the Environmental Protection Agency. And when that was created, at that time, a lot of things were happening in this country. There was a burgeoning Black Power movement. Dr. Martin Luther King had just been assassinated in 1968. There was a powerful queer rights movement that was happening all around this country. There was a powerful women's and feminist movement that was also happening. The Vietnam War was taking place. There was an anti-war movement. And during that time, there was a movement to begin to center environmentalism as well. It's very important to know that's not conservation. The conservation movement, which is sometimes problematic for different reasons, was a movement that was started 120 years ago. Groups like the NWF, Sierra Clubs, and others were about preserving the land. That's different than the environmental movement that would take place in 1968. Most of the organizations, I see my guy back here waving at me to turn the mic on. Hold on a second. Can you hear me?
Here we go.
Testing. Can you hear me okay? Y'all just stared. I'm making sure y'all can hear me okay. Everybody giving me that look like as though it wasn't on there for a second. The environmental movement, which was created between 1968 and 1972, was created by most of the environmental organizations that we know today. The Conservation Voters, Earth Justice, NRDC, National Resource Defense Council, on and on. African Institute, they were created between that 4-year spent. And in that 4-year spent, they began to organize and work to see what we could create to protect our air and our water. That's important because there was no Environmental Protection Agency. And they began to petition Richard Nixon to begin to see if we could actually create an agency that could protect the environment. They were successful, primarily because of the first Earth Day that took place in 1970. 7 million people took the streets of New York City and around. Gaylord Nelson and many others, my dear friend Bill McKibben, and many others were organizing to do sit-ins and things right here on Yale and across college campuses throughout the country. That's important because we saw a burgeoning movement of people coming together, fighting for this planet. But what wasn't connected to that was the other things that were happening at the same time. So while we were fighting for clean air and clean water and fighting so the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland could no longer be on fire or the smog in LA, the other issues that were happening at the same time we were creating the first Earth Day were being ignored by the environmental movement. And so the issues of queer rights and women's rights and civil rights were not interconnected into the environmental movement. This is important. And you'll understand how these things connect. And later on, the environmental justice movement, the movement that was predominantly around for black, brown, and indigenous people, that was started by the church. Dr. Benjamin Chavis and the UCC and many other church congregations would come together, working with Divinity schools in the 80s to say that what is happening primarily to black, brown, and indigenous people is wrong. And they would gather themselves together to see what they could do. And they would march in the streets. It would be birthed out of Warren County, North Carolina. And in that process, in that birth, they would then see that we could come together. The Washington Post would say that if this burgeoning environmental justice movement of black, brown, and indigenous people, along with the large climate movement that was started at the beginning of the 70s on the heels of Earth Day, if these movements with the church and communities, all kinds of people, then we could actually solve the crisis of clean air and clean water. But this is the first sin, Dean, that takes place. That this burgeoning movement of the environmental movement would not respect the environmental justice movement. And this would be catastrophic for years to come. The reason it will become catastrophic is because, as will be laid out later, this movement began to treat black, brown, and indigenous people like they were at the kiddies' table at a Thanksgiving dinner. And they would not interlock. And the first sin that the environmental movement, which will come back to haunt, they literally discarded the people who are most vulnerable and at risk. As Anthony mentioned, he talked about Cancer Alley. I was born right outside of Cancer Alley. I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana. And in that process, there's a place that creates industry. It's so bad that almost every other person within this community develops cancer from industry. But again, it would be overlooked and not known. But there's a larger issue at hand, because then you have the fossil fuel industry itself. And the fossil fuel industry, which would grow beyond what we could imagine, would be in a position where they are literally raking in billions of dollars and not being stopped, and putting those at most vulnerable in that position. So, the reason why all this is important and the work that has to be done in this moment, that we now must reconnect the civil rights, human rights, and the environmental movement together to be successful. One of the things that we have been working on and trying to break the sins of this process has been in using culture, and using culture to begin to bring people together. And using culture in a way that using it so that we can be ahead of the curve, I would say, I would say that in that process. I would say that in this process, they would be using poetry and music and dance and art to begin to expand and broaden the movement. So here we are. It is now 2025. And we are in a position in which we are looking at how we can overcome the sins of a movement that first siloed itself back from 1968 to 1972, how a movement in the 80s that did not work with the environmental justice movement, how a movement that discarded the church from being a part of its process, and how a movement that literally did not use policies to begin to bring people together. We are now in a time when we now have those who are in charge of these same agencies. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which I mentioned to you earlier, is now being called upon to reduce its budget by 85%. The Department of Energy is being dismantled. Almost all of the chief meteorologists at the NOAA agency have been fired or been asked to be terminated. The world is looking at resolving issues from the climate crisis, from the Paris Climate Accord. And many of those same nations are beginning to fall out. And on top of that, in regards to my hat, which I wear a lot of hats. I guess I don't know that. I didn't try to get that memo coming in, but I do wear a lot of hats. But in that, my hat says that plastics are fossil fuels. And we as humans are now consuming a credit card size worth of plastic every single week through our microfibers. We are now beginning to find plastic in our brains, in the placenta, and in our arteries. We are in the midst of a crisis. So you would be wondering, we have all these sins. How do we repair these sins, Rev, if you say that we have the original sin with racism, we have the sin of us being separated, we have the sin of greed, we have the sin of power, and we have these other sins that have broken humanity apart. Well, that takes me back to my original story. I started off this story with the story of the Amistad. And in that, there's a scene in the movie with Joseph Cinque, which was 1979, in which Joseph Cinque, right by stand here with the mic. Joseph Cinque does the scene in which he says he's in the courtroom. Anybody remember that scene, the courtroom scene? Y'all hear Yale? Y'all remember the Yale? Y'all remember that scene? I'm actually like making sure. Y'all remember that scene? Because I know we got a lot of young folks. I want to make sure to paint the picture. If you have not seen the Amistad is a must-see movie. And you can go on Hulu or Paramount or something and check it out, or YouTube, or whatever. But it's a movie that was filmed that took place and released in 1997. And the reason I bring that scene up is because in the courtroom scene with Joseph Cinque, who is the leader of those who are enslaved, and in that scene, he is talking and he realizes that the folks who are in the courtroom, they are speaking to each other about his demise. And in that scene, Joseph Cinque begins to say, "Give us free." And it's a very low tone. "Give us free." And he begins to speak up and they say, "We can't have this kind of outburst. Give us free." The moment that we're in now, to break the sins, are going to require us to not to say "give us free," but to be "give us fossil free." And in this moment, we're going to need to do these things. Step one, we are going to need to go to and go back to our faith communities and our institutions like the one I went to at Howard Divinity and the one here, Yale Divinity, and all of the seminaries are going to need to immediately begin to have curriculums that understand combining faith and climate. I'm sure it's already being done, but it needs to be done at a high level so that when people leave here and are going back to either their churches, their mosques, their synagogues, or even to then teach. They must be prepared for a world that is on fire. That is step one. We must prepare the next generation. Why this is important is because when Antonique and I, who started Climate Revival, and we went around to the churches, many of the churches were not prepared to even understand that we were in a climate crisis. And they were actually refuting the fact. Many of them had said, we heard about that, we don't understand, there's nothing more we can do about it. But they had been, for the first time, engaging with their parishioners. Even in some cases where some churches, not too far from here in Delaware, which is right next to the DuPont plant, those churches were establishing bereavement ministries. They were having so much cancer in their churches that they were literally setting up ways to send flowers to their members because their members were dying at such a high rate. And when we came there, we were like, this is something that we should discuss. Maybe nothing against having the bereavement ministry, but maybe we got rid of the thing that was causing the cancer in the first place. Then you may not need a bereavement ministry to take care of your parishioners. So step one, we have to do everything we can to open our doors in the fact that our communities do not understand the climate crisis that we are in. A climate crisis that is devastating our communities. Step one. Step two, we must do everything we can to ensure that the political nature that has been done by the fossil fuel industry is rolled back, and that we are in a position to understand that we must either shape policy or policy will continue to shape us. We are in a position right now that we are not understanding the policies for our communities that is devastating them in massive ways in regards to clean air and clean water. The third thing, Antonique said it quite well, is that we as humans must begin to move ourselves in a way that is moving in compassion and love. Because right now, as I am talking to those who are in the climate movement, who so often want to get on their high horse and tell folks about the 1,000-year flood that we're experiencing or the 1,000-year fire, but they're not concerned about the people who are decimated and losing everything. In the aftermath of Hurricane Helene in Georgia, the two youngest victims, Kaiser and Kashmir Kobe, those two victims who were killed were a month old on September 30th when their house was destroyed because their mother was afraid to leave her trailer park because she didn't have money to leave. And instead of us being concerned about those who are in that position, we are leaving our people and our humans behind. That is something that we cannot do. And fourth, and most important in this process, our people, our neighbors, are beginning to give up hope on life. I know when I was in divinity school, I understand that we have some of the most exciting and vigorous debates about if God is real, about how many people actually wrote Genesis and the texts and the different, this a tale and this is, I understand. And I, being the nerd I am, got into that. and loved it, the debate, and it challenged me. Even from my great Pentecostal background, challenged me to the core. Is there really a devil? Is there not a devil? Does the devil leave when you leave the room? All them fun conversations we have, all that kind of stuff. When the room is empty, the devil's gone. When you come in, the devil shows up. All that fun stuff that we have. But what is not and what's needed is that when people are beginning to commit suicide and to give up on life because of the political rhetoric and the world that they see before themselves, the world they see that is crashing because we will not do the right thing, then something is wrong. I want to leave you with, Dean said, make sure we leave, and I want with time for questions, and I'm going to leave the clock with time for questions, but I want to leave you with something that I always say as I close. And this is the thing. I am so honored to be at this illustrious Yale Divinity School. I was honored to go to Howard Divinity School and be a TA for New Testament Old Testament and be the student body president for my divinity school. I was honored to serve my country as a chaplain in the Air Force. I was honored to get the award last year from Forbes magazine. So there was 50 people who fights for sustainability, me using culture, honored. And they told me, I guess I edged out Elon Musk. I really got excited for that in that process. So it was 51. So I said, I'm not sure I fell on the 50 list, but that feels great. I don't got a car company. But in that process, what I do know is this. The same way with Sinke, who is no longer here, but I am quoting his words. But I do know that 100 years from now, none of us in this room will be here. It won't matter the thesis, the papers, the thoughts. It's important to have that and to do that. I told you I enjoyed that, but none of that will matter if fellow humans do not have clean air and clean water. If we allow for the sin of environmental injustice to not be broken and allow for them not to have clean air and clean water, they will curse the ground that we walk on. This is this moment that you're in. This is the time that we're in. I will leave here. And I will, along with Antonique and my team, will put literally, our lives on the line. We were told, Dean, we could not stop the Keystone XL pipeline. It's a pipeline that was built from the tar sands of Canada that have gone through Nebraska, ended up in the Gulf Coast. In that process, we stood together and we went to the White House to fight to end that pipeline. At that time, the president was President Barack Obama. And it was only 2 people of color in that protest who were leading, myself and the great Julian Bond. And Julian Bond was old, and his body was beginning to break down. And when we were arrested, myself and others had to hold up Julian Bond's arms, because every time the paddy wagon hit a speed bump, Julian Bond would scream out. And the most hardest scream you can imagine. But when we got done, Julian Bond said that there's nothing more important than fighting for our planet. We fought for equality, but we're now fighting for existence. This is our lunch counter moment for the 21st century. We will break the chains and the sins of this past movement, but only as if we as humans come together. That is the time we have now. So I hope that within this hallowed grounds that you are in, that I know becomes very difficult at times to see outside the walls. I hope you understand that outside the walls, it is burning. People are drowning. People are hurting. And this is the time where the genius that you have, the gifts you have been given, that you use it for this moment we are in right now. I wish this endowment and this lecture series continues on. There are many speakers who sweat up here like I'm sweating and speak with passion. But if we do not fix what we are under right now, which we can fix, then this and Yale and you and future generations will not exist. But I believe in humans. I believe in humanity. And if I could end on a Southern kind of Pentecostal note, since I've given you all of my nice, broke down the history of the moment, the movement, and told you what can work and told you what couldn't work, and cited past things here in New Haven. Let me just say this. The one thing that I remember from Divinity School that has always stuck out to me is that when they did a study, and actually they took somebody from Yale, a student, I think a student from Morehouse Divinity School, and I think one from Harvard, and I think one from like Dallas Seminary. And they got an old grandmother, a black grandmother, out in Tennessee. And they did a study of who had the most faith. And that black grandmother, who I don't think had a 5th or 6th grade education over the rest of us theologians, had much more faith because she saw her mama and her daddy and our children. This is a time, if there's ever a time, for the foolish things to confound the wise. Thank y'all so much.
I would like to say, I wish that every pulpit in the country would have a message like this.
Amen.
So, thank you very much. We do have a little bit of time for Q&A, so Brock has the mic in his hand. Would you please identify yourself and make sure that if you have a comment, disguise it as a question.
Thank you for that. Actually, that's I like the reflective. I'm also reflective, but I see the question. Def, go ahead.
Okay.
Is on? Okay. My name's Peter. I'm a first year here.
Hey, Peter.
Loved what you have to say.
Thank you, Peter.
I appreciate your passion, and I think your commitment to truth that goes beyond just knowledge. I think we always need to be reminded of that. But I guess when you're talking, I studied geosciences in college,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I should just go back to geosciences. Like, screw this divinity school thing. Like, I should go try to save the planet with science, you know? But I guess, how do you see, I mean, obviously you all work with art, and you work with the churches, and you're trying to bring about change in that capacity. Do you see art and faith as able to do something other than just inspire, like, social activism? I guess, like, protest? Like, how do you see change coming about practically through these kind of things that aren't necessarily like bringing about scientific solutions or marching on the White House? Because we can't always do that when we're in the Divinity School classroom or something. I was wondering if you could talk a little more about that.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I hope Antonique would share this question with me, because she obviously, she didn't get the other part to her thing, but Antonique obviously starred in the Broadway on Rent, and also was many people who are hip-hop heads. If you ever saw the movie Notorious, she played Faith Evans in Notorious. And so knowing the archivist side, hoping she maybe answer that question. Let me talk about your first thing, your first comment you mentioned about your previous background. And then I actually think there's ever a place you need to be to combine science and religion. And Dr. King mentioned that those two things go together. It's here. It's because right now, we didn't get into this, but obviously one of the things that's being targeted is our faith community is being targeted and not understanding science. And so there's a need to connect those dots. And there's also a thing to keep it real in this conversation, in which a lot of those who are within particularly the progressive movement, which is, again, we want people to be everything. You could be atheist, you could be agnostic, you could be Baptist, you could be Jewish, you could be Buddhist, you could be whatever you want to be. I think the one thing, though, that there is sometimes this looking down approach on faith. And there is a situation here within faith that the progressive movement has had a situation where, and I said this actually at a faith conference, where you might be too young for this, but you may not be. But they used to go to the drugstore. Dean knows this. I know Dean knows this. But you used to go to the drugstore. Dean's wife knows this. But you used to go to the drugstore. You used to get clip-on glasses, and the clip-on glasses, when you were inside, you do know. Okay, good. And you would take the clip-ons off, and then when you went outside, you would clip them back on again. A lot of times, the climate movement has treated faith that way. They treated faith like a clip-on and a clip-off. So there is a need to connect those two things within your previous life and your current life in that regard. In regards to art, one of the things that I believe in is the phrase of Tony Cade Bambara. And which Tony Cade Bambara said these prophetic words. He said the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And in that, I do think that artists, like people of faith, particularly those who are in this, people of faith and artists share something that is unfortunate, that they hear and feel things. It's the reason why you get up probably at 3 a.m, as they would say. Artists are the same exact way. And they literally, in many cases, they hear and feel the pain and horror of what's going on around them. So they just can't see it. When they see something bad, they have to then describe it. So really what art can do, in many cases, is to, one, help to broaden the movement, because art then allows more of us to be together. I think it's actually more important than a lecture. Two, I think what art can also do is that it allows us to have one's culture be involved in this process. And I'll stop there, because I would love for Anthony to come up and say her thoughts on how art can be utilized to broaden this. Would you like to do that, Ann? Thanks.
I'll sing after Rev, but I don't like to have to speak after Rev. So I wish I could have answered the question first. But you said faith and art. So faith, I can't even imagine how I would feel in the world right now with everything going on if I didn't have my faith in God, if I wasn't able to get up in the morning and pray and just cast my cares on God and have him help me through everything. It's so scary. It's so chaotic and crazy and evil. And that is why we need faith in this movement, just to believe that we can win, just to know that we have a higher power, we have somebody helping us together. And then also just to piggyback on what Rev said, the unity. We need more than just the people who are in the movement. Like it's folks who get it. But then there's a whole, like, at least in our country, there's a whole, like, half the country who thinks it's a hoax. We need them too. We need all hands on deck. So the thing about art is it's healing, so that helps with also the part that faith does too. It heals the wounds. I sang at a thing on Saturday with the world's top brain surgeons. It was like helping them raise money, and one of the surgeons said music heals the brain, and I was like, oh man, can you send me like a study on that? I would love to be able to talk about that. That's incredible. So some of that works in the same thing with God, and obviously God created the ability to make music, so I know that it's no coincidence that music heals. But we need music to change people's hearts. There's hardened hearts. And I remember I was reading recently, I've been trying to do the Bible in a year thing again, and I was reading through Exodus, which we all know Exodus story. I mean, it's like, so that's why I was kind of like breezing through it, but I was like, it just kept pointing to me. God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and it just kept saying he hardened his heart. There are so many hardened hearts right now that we need on our side. We need to soften their hearts. We need God to help us soften hearts, and that's where art comes in. So it's not just to get people to mobilize and get out there actually on the ground marching. We need that too, but the first thing we need to do is to soften those hardened hearts so that they'll join in with us and know that this is a crisis. We have an issue. Let's come together, and then when we are all together, then I do believe we can win. So we need to use art, faith, hope, and love. I think that's the recipe.
We can take another question if we've got it. Ryan?
Well, thank you so much. It's such a privilege to have you here and to hear from you.
Tell them who you are.
Oh, yeah, sorry. My name is Ryan. I teach here and environmental ethics kind of work. You talked about this sin of the split between, or the way in which the environmental movement failed to account for environmental justice and race and also faith. And I really appreciate this analysis of things. And I see the way that you're bringing this together in your work. I was wondering if you could just talk more broadly about like where you see other places that you see these things coming together. Like what has you excited in the kind of environmental movement, the climate movement, and in other places that you see these things coming together?
So one of the things, in building up the Hip Hop Caucus, which is an amazing organization, I've actually been blessed to work on several organizations. One of them is obviously now Conn Revival. One of them is another one called Green 2.0. Another one is called Color of Change. So I helped to found these institutions. And so in there, in founding them, one of the things was I always realized no cash, no cause, really. So it was always hard to get things done. I bring that up because about 6 years ago, I'm on the board of an organization and was working and then connected with Mike Bloomberg. And he became one of our funders. And then later on, we became friends. Interesting, because Mike is this former mayor of New York City, 80-year-old Jewish man, and I'm a black guy from Louisiana. But we actually hit it off for some reason. We became really good friends. And in that, he asked me to be his advisor for his nonprofit and then now I'm his senior advisor to him. And I bring that up because what makes me now excited is on the philanthropy side. Let me say, one of the sins that's rough on that is that one of the reasons why I want to get that too is that out of about 4 years ago, the new school did a study in which they looked at the $1.3 billion that 12 foundations were giving. Only 1.3% of that went to Black, Brown, and Indigenous and people of color-led organizations. And that was problematic because not only was it the split that I talked about within these larger movements that were predominantly white that weren't working together with other organizations, that would just make sense to do it. But then on top of that, the monies weren't going to then environmental justice organizations as well. Since that time, the Justice for Initiative came out. That may have some rocky road now with the current administration. But what's really exciting to me is what is happening internationally. So first step internationally, I think, and this is one thing that Mike did do, was his America All in which he literally paid for America to stay in the Paris Climate Accord. So that was just an amazing thing. That was very powerful. The second thing is around this issue of plastic. What's exciting about that is that I've always looked to see where we can all kind of come together, both Republicans and Democrats as humans. And so for some reason, we all hate plastic. And so that's actually a great thing. I was watching, different reasons though, different reasons. I mean, I know Bree on one side in Louisiana, they hate plastic because it's going into the bloodstream and all kind of stuff. On Joe Rogan, they hate plastic because apparently plastic makes your sperm count go down, and also, I guess, plastic also makes men's junk get smaller. So that's a big deal for the Joe Rogan crew. But we all together though. Somehow that's bringing us together. I'm not sure why that's the issue, but in that process, that is something that is important because if we can find this common ground, even on that, then we can stop the end around game of the philosophy industry, which wants to use plastic in that aspect. Plastic is the end around game because obviously we are transitioning from fossil fuels and fossil fuels are just running out. Plastic is the thing because it is oil and gas. They want to use that as their profit margin. That it literally is their business plan. And so we can stop that. So that's exciting that even though we have different reasons why we want to get involved with the issue, obviously, it's still exciting. We all don't like plastic. The other thing I think which is very important is that litigation. There have been some amazing lawsuits that have been happening that are very instrumental that we have begun to see. Obviously, the lawsuits for Formosa. If you don't know, this is a faith organization, Rise St. James, which is run by Ms. Sharon Levine and her family. Ms. Sharon Levine runs Rise St. James. It's in St. James, Louisiana, but she just won. She was named one of the Times 100 recipients because they stopped the Formosa chemical plant, and we've been seeing that now. Roshetta Ozane and others are stopping. Literally, this is another reason why we need to break the sin of this barrier. These organizations are run predominantly by women, and women of color are winning. And so, to me, not that we should stop funding other groups, but if these women and women of color are winning on the front line, then we should fund them so that they can continue to win and do what needs to be done. The next thing I think is research. I think research, particularly from places from Columbia, Johns Hopkins, and other institutions is so exciting. They are literally now able to see how much particulate matters in the air. Like they can literally go and begin to see who is polluting who. So they can go into, Johns Hopkins has a van, for instance, that can go into a community and they can say this plant is emitting this much, which is literally causing cancer and asthma and emphysema. So they can literally now, the levels of research now and data that we can acquire, this should be helping us. So there's some exciting things. The only thing that I would say is daunting, as I said before, is time. This year, we have to go to the climate conference in Brazil, the plastics treaty in Germany. We have, unfortunately, our current government is fighting that, which is unfortunate. This is not a Republican Democrat issue, it's a human issue. So I do think that's unfortunate where we are, but there's a lot of good things that are still happening. And if we can continue to turn the tide internationally, and to the point of what Antonique and others are doing with culture, I honestly think that people are beginning to get more into it. The more that we can broaden this, engage our communities, the more that we can win. I'll say this in closing, one of the things at both from Antonique, what she's doing now with her role, definitely Love Song to the Earth is a song that's out now, but Hip Hop Caucus and work that they're doing, Bree, wave your hand, Bree. Bree's here from Hip Hop Caucus. One of the things that is happening in that regard is that they are doing documentaries and films that are coming out. And so I'm excited that people are using, and there's a huge amount of interest that we just came from Hollywood, from studios like Paramount, HBO, Netflix, who are looking to, if not do green stories, they're looking for stories that allow us to tell this in a more robust way. So I'm really excited about that. So there is a lot of good that is happening. It's just, we just have a clock, and the clock is daunting.
We want to thank, I'm going to confess, everybody who speaks publicly is a little bit jealous of your warm-up act. The ambassador for Earth Day.
Yes.
But the problem would be to follow her, but you followed her very, very powerfully.
Thank you. That's the hard, it is the hard act to follow.
But we are very grateful for both of your presence and for Bree as well. But thank you so much for your presence here and for your work and what you're doing. We are standing with you and we applaud. Would you join me?
Thank you.